A story made with love by FMTJ.
There's a moment every evening when the world begins to soften. The light changes, shadows stretch across the floor, and somewhere deep inside, your body remembers what comes next. But what if that gentle transition never arrives? What if bedtime feels like a battle instead of a blessing? Tonight, we're going to discover where the night becomes gentle and why some children find it so easily while others struggle to let the day release them. Picture a child standing at the edge of sleep. Behind them, the bright chaos of daytime still echoes with laughter, questions, discoveries, and endless motion. Ahead lies the quiet mystery of night, where consciousness dissolves and dreams take over. That threshold between waking and sleeping is where everything happens, and most of us never stop to consider just how complex that crossing really is. The human brain doesn't have an off switch. Unlike your laptop or tablet, you can't simply press a button and watch everything power down in an orderly sequence. Instead, sleep is something your brain has to actively create, piece by piece, through a carefully orchestrated series of chemical and electrical changes that scientists are still working to fully understand. When a child resists bedtime, we often think they're being stubborn or defiant. We assume they simply don't want to miss out on whatever exciting things might happen after they close their eyes. Sometimes that's true, but more often, something else is at play. Their nervous system hasn't received the signal that it's safe to let go. Think about what we're actually asking children to do when we say it's time for bed. We're asking them to surrender control, to trust that they'll wake up again, to release their grip on consciousness and drift into a state where anything might happen in their dreams. For a young mind still making sense of the world, that's an enormous act of faith. The gentleness of night doesn't just appear on its own. It has to be cultivated, invited, welcomed like a shy guest who won't enter until they feel truly at home. So where does that gentleness begin? It starts long before a child's head touches the pillow. It begins in the transition moments we often rush through without realizing their significance. The shift from outdoor play to indoor quiet. The change from bright overhead lights to softer lamps. The movement from running and jumping to sitting and listening. Every transition is a small goodbye, and children feel those goodbyes more intensely than we remember. Saying goodbye to the day means letting go of everything that happened, both the wonderful moments they want to hold on to and the difficult moments they're still processing. Their minds are sorting through it all, trying to make sense of experiences that adults would barely notice. Watch a tired child fight sleep sometime. Really watch. Their eyes grow heavy, then suddenly snap open with renewed determination. Their body relaxes, then tenses up again, as if catching itself from falling. They're not trying to be difficult. They're caught between two powerful forces, exhaustion pulling them down and something else holding them up. That something else is often an unfinished feeling, a question without an answer, or simply the fear that letting go means losing something important. Here's what changed everything for me. I stopped thinking of bedtime as an endpoint and started seeing it as a journey with specific landmarks along the way. Each landmark serves a purpose, helping a child's nervous system downshift from the high alert of daytime into the receptive calm needed for sleep. The first landmark is acknowledgement. Before a child can move towards sleep, they need to feel seen and heard exactly as they are in that moment. Not rushed, not judged, not redirected, just witnessed. When you sit with a child and give them your full presence, even for 2 minutes, something in their system begins to settle. They stop fighting for your attention because they already have it. The second landmark is rhythm. The body loves patterns and predictability, especially at the end of the day when decision fatigue has depleted everyone's resources. This doesn't mean rigid schedules, but rather a reliable flow of events that the body begins to recognize and anticipate. Bath, then pajamas, then story, then lights down. The sequence matters less than the consistency. The third landmark is story, and this one carries more weight than most people realize. Stories don't just entertain or distract. They create a bridge between the outer world and the inner world, giving the conscious mind something to focus on, while the unconscious mind begins its nightly work. But not just any story will do. The stories that usher children most gently into sleep share certain qualities that work with the brain's natural transition into rest, rather than against it. They move slowly. They embrace repetition. They avoid sudden conflicts or stimulating plot twists. They create a sense of safety and resolution. Think about traditional lullabies and fairy tales. The same phrases repeat again and again. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. The endings bring everyone safely home. These patterns emerged over thousands of years because they work with how our brains actually function during the descent into sleep. Modern children's entertainment often does the opposite, ramping up excitement to hold attention in an increasingly distracted world. Those stories have their place, but bedtime isn't it. At bedtime, we need stories that slow the heartbeat rather than quicken it, that soothe rather than stimulate. And this brings us to something most parents discover by accident rather than by design. The content of the bedtime story matters far less than the voice delivering it. A parent reading with tension in their voice, rushing to get through the pages so they can move on to the next task, transmits that urgency directly into the child's nervous system. But a voice that has already found its own gentleness, that has softened and slowed, that carries the quality of night already within it, that voice becomes the lullaby itself, regardless of the words being spoken. This is why the most effective bedtime routine begins not with the child, but with you. Before you even enter their room, pause. Take 3 slow breaths. Feel your own shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. You cannot guide someone to a place you haven't first visited yourself. When you bring that settled quality into the room with you, children feel it immediately. Their bodies are reading yours constantly, calibrating their own nervous systems against the signals you're broadcasting. If you're already halfway to sleep yourself in terms of energy and presence, they'll follow you there far more readily than if you're still vibrating with the residual intensity of your day. But what about the nights when you can't find that calm? When your own nervous system is frayed and you're running on empty? Those nights happen to everyone. The key isn't perfection, it's honesty paired with gentleness. You can say to a child, "My body feels a little wound up tonight, so we're going to take some extra breaths together." Then you do exactly that. You breathe slowly, audibly, and you invite them to match you. Often within a dozen breaths, both of you have shifted. Now let's talk about what happens after the story ends, because this is where many parents inadvertently restart the waking process just when sleep is finally within reach. The story finishes, you close the book, and then comes the negotiation. One more story. I need water. My leg itches. I have to tell you something important. These aren't manipulations, though they can certainly feel like them at 10 o'clock when you're desperate for time to yourself. They're actually the nervous system's last attempts to avoid the vulnerable act of letting go into unconsciousness. Young children especially can feel afraid of sleep without having words for that fear. Sleep means separation. It means losing control. It means entering a state where anything might happen in dreams and they won't have their usual defenses available. So they create reasons to pull you back, to keep the connection alive just a little longer, to delay the inevitable release. What works better than arguing or bargaining? A simple physical anchor, your hand on their back, your presence in the room for a specified time. A clear, calm statement. I'm staying right here while you fall asleep. You're safe. Everything is okay. Then you become boring. You don't engage with questions or requests. You just stay, breathing slowly, being the solid presence their system needs to finally let go. Some parents worry this creates dependence. that children should learn to fall asleep alone. But here's what research on attachment actually tells us. Children who have their need for closeness met consistently don't become more dependent. They become more secure, and that security eventually allows them to separate more easily. The child who knows you'll stay when they need you is the same child who will eventually wave you away, confident in their own ability to manage the transition into sleep. There's also the question of what children are actually doing in those final minutes before sleep arrives. Their brains aren't simply switching off. They're processing the entire day, sorting experiences, filing memories, making sense of emotions they didn't have time to fully feel when they were actually happening. This is necessary work, but it can also stir things up. You might notice your child suddenly wanting to talk about something that happened days ago, or asking questions about death, or worrying about whether you'll still be there in the morning. These aren't stalling tactics. They're the mind doing what it naturally does when given quiet and safety. It surfaces what needs attention. Your job isn't to fix or dismiss these thoughts. It's to acknowledge them gently and reassure your child that some questions can rest overnight and be picked up again tomorrow. I'll tell you about the night this all crystallized for me. My daughter was 5, and we'd been struggling with bedtime for weeks. Every night felt like a battle. I was exhausted and resentful, watching the clock, mentally calculating how much time I was losing to this nightly ordeal. Then one night I made a decision. I would stop fighting. I would stop watching the clock. I would simply be there, fully there, for however long it took. That night I lay down next to her instead of sitting in the chair. I matched my breathing to hers. I let my own body get heavy. I stopped trying to make anything happen. And something unexpected occurred. She fell asleep in 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Less time than we'd spent negotiating on every previous night that week. But more importantly, those 12 minutes felt completely different. There was no tension, no resistance, just two nervous systems finding rest together. That's when I understood. The struggle had never been about her unwillingness to sleep. It had been about the energy I was bringing into the room. My urgency was creating her resistance. My impatience was fueling her stalling. The moment I stopped pushing, she stopped pulling away. This doesn't mean you have to lie down with your child every night forever. It means you have to first establish genuine ease around sleep before you can gradually step back. You can't skip the connection part and jump straight to independence. Well, you can try, but you'll likely spend far more time and energy fighting than you would have spent simply being present until the pattern shifted naturally. The biological reality is this. Human children are designed to fall asleep in the presence of a calm, protective adult. That's not a flaw in the system. That's the system working exactly as it should. For hundreds of thousands of years, falling asleep alone meant being vulnerable to predators. Our children's brains still carry that ancient wiring, and no amount of logical explanation will override it. What does override it? Repetition and safety. When a child's nervous system learns through consistent experience that sleep is safe, that you'll be there if needed, that nothing bad happens in the vulnerable space between waking and sleeping, then gradually that system begins to relax its vigilance. But here's what I need you to understand. That learning process isn't linear. There will be nights when everything flows smoothly, and then suddenly you'll have 3 difficult nights in a row. This isn't regression, it's recalibration. Your child's brain is integrating new developmental leaps, processing new experiences, adjusting to growth spurts that make their body feel unfamiliar. During these periods, they need more support, not less. They need the reassurance that even when things feel uncertain, you're still the constant. I've watched parents interpret these normal fluctuations as failure. They'll tell me their child was doing great with independent sleep, but now suddenly needs them again, and they're worried they've ruined all their progress. They haven't ruined anything. They're witnessing development in action. The 5-year-old who suddenly needs you at bedtime again isn't backsliding. They're processing the enormous cognitive leap of understanding that people can die, that you won't be around forever, that the world contains real dangers. The 8-year-old who can't settle alone anymore isn't being manipulative. They're dealing with new social anxieties, academic pressures, a growing awareness of how complex relationships actually are. What these moments require is flexibility. The same approach that worked last month might not work now, not because you're doing something wrong, but because your child is literally a different person than they were last month. Their brain has formed new connections, their body has grown, their understanding of the world has expanded. Meeting them where they are right now is always more effective than insisting they return to where they were before. Let me tell you what this looks like practically. You might have a child who falls asleep easily with a simple goodnight kiss. Then suddenly they need you to stay in the room. Instead of seeing this as a problem to solve, ask yourself what's changed. Did they watch something that scared them? Are they starting a new school year? Did a grandparent get sick? Did another child say something unsettling at recess? Often there's a clear catalyst, but sometimes it's just internal development that we can't see directly. Your response in these moments shapes everything. You can meet the need with presence and patience, which teaches your child that when they're struggling, connection is available. Or you can respond with frustration and rigidity, which teaches them that their needs are burdensome and they should hide their vulnerability. Neither response will change how long this phase lasts, but one will strengthen your relationship while the other strains it. I want to address something that comes up constantly. Parents ask me how to tell the difference between a genuine need and a manipulative behavior. They worry that if they respond to every request, they're being played. Here's the truth that might surprise you. Young children aren't sophisticated enough to manipulate in the way adults fear. What looks like manipulation is usually either a genuine need being expressed poorly or a test to see if you're really available. Both require the same response, which is calm, consistent presence combined with clear boundaries. Think about it this way. If your child asks for a 7th glass of water, they're not running a con. They're either genuinely thirsty or they're anxious and using the water request as a way to bring you back into the room because they don't have the words to say they're feeling scared or lonely. Either way, the solution isn't to refuse the water with frustration. It's to bring the water and then address what's underneath. You might say something like this: "Here's your water, and this is the last trip I'm making tonight. I'm right down the hall if you need me, but now it's time for your body to rest." Then you follow through. You don't go back for an 8th glass, but you also don't shame them for asking. Boundaries and responsiveness aren't opposites. They work together. Your child needs to know both that you'll meet their genuine needs and that there are limits to how much negotiation will happen. The key is delivering those boundaries without anger or exasperation. The limit itself isn't the problem. It's the emotional charge we bring to enforcing it that creates the battle. Something else I see parents struggle with is the idea that helping their child sleep means they're doing something wrong. We've created this cultural narrative that children should be independent sleepers from a very young age, and that needing parental presence at bedtime is somehow a failure of parenting or a flaw in the child. This narrative is nonsense. It's not based on biology or developmental science. It's based on cultural values that prioritize individual independence over relationship and connection. In many parts of the world, families sleep together for years without anyone worrying about creating dependence. Those children grow up to be perfectly functional, independent adults. The Western obsession with getting babies and young children to sleep alone in separate rooms is historically unusual and culturally specific. That doesn't make it wrong, but it does mean we should stop treating it as the only natural or healthy approach. What matters isn't whether your child falls asleep alone or with you nearby. What matters is whether bedtime feels safe and connected. whether your child is getting enough quality sleep, and whether your family system is sustainable. If everyone is sleeping well and no one is miserable, then whatever you're doing is working. If bedtime is a nightly battle that leaves everyone depleted and resentful, then something needs to shift, regardless of what sleep philosophy you think you should be following. The question isn't whether you're spoiling your child by staying with them at bedtime. The question is whether the current pattern is working for your actual family, with your actual child, in your actual circumstances. Because here's what I've learned after years of working with families. There is no perfect bedtime routine that works for every child. There's only what works for your child right now in this phase. And that might look completely different from what works for your neighbor's child, or what the book says should work, or what worked for your older kid at the same age. This is where parents get stuck. They find a method, a philosophy, a set of rules, and they try to force their unique child into that framework. When it doesn't work, they assume they're doing it wrong or that their child is unusually difficult. But the mismatch isn't about failure, it's about fit. Some children are naturally more adaptable. They can shift from activity to sleep without much support. Others have nervous systems that need more time, more co-regulation, more predictable structure to make that transition. Neither type is better or worse. They're just different. And the parenting approach that works has to match the child you actually have, not the child you wish you had, or the child the book described. I worked with a family once, where the father was convinced that their 5-year-old son just needed tougher boundaries at bedtime. He'd read that children will push as far as you let them, and he believed their son was manipulating them by calling out after lights out. So he implemented a strict rule. Once the door closed, no more interaction. If his son called out, he'd be ignored. The first night, his son cried for 40 minutes. The second night, 30. By the fourth night, he'd stopped calling out, and the father felt victorious. Problem solved, right? Except his son started having nightmares. He became clingy during the day. He began refusing to go upstairs alone, even in the afternoon. The behavior at bedtime had stopped, but the underlying need hadn't been addressed. It had just moved somewhere else. When we dug into what was actually happening, it turned out the son wasn't manipulating anyone. He was genuinely anxious at night. The house made unfamiliar sounds after dark. He didn't like the shadows on his wall. He wanted reassurance that his parents were nearby. None of that was manipulation. It was a nervous system struggling to feel safe. Once the parents understood that, they adjusted. They added a nightlight. They left his door cracked. His dad started checking in once after lights out, just to say goodnight one more time. Within a week, the nightmares stopped. The clinginess faded. Bedtime became calm again. The difference wasn't stricter boundaries. It was boundaries applied with understanding instead of rigidity. Now let's talk about what happens when you're exhausted and bedtime feels impossible. Because I don't want to pretend this is easy. Some nights you're running on empty. You've got nothing left to give, and the idea of staying calm through another round of requests or negotiations feels completely out of reach. On those nights, perfection isn't the goal. Good enough is the goal. Maybe you skip the full routine and just do the essentials. Maybe you let them fall asleep in your bed and transfer them later. Maybe you put on an audiobook and lie down next to them because you need the rest too. None of that undoes the work you've done on other nights. One rough night doesn't create a permanent pattern. What does create problems is when every night becomes a battle because you're too depleted to respond with patience. If that's where you are, it's worth looking at what needs to change during the day so you're not arriving at bedtime already empty. That might mean asking for more support from a partner. It might mean lowering your standards in other areas so you have more capacity for the evening. It might mean admitting that your current schedule isn't sustainable and something has to give. Bedtime isn't happening in a vacuum. It's the end of a long day, and if that day has drained you completely, bedtime will feel harder than it needs to. Here's something else that matters. Your child can sense your emotional state. If you're approaching bedtime with dread or frustration, they feel it. And when they feel it, they get more activated, not less. It's not intentional on their part. It's just how nervous systems work. Your anxiety feeds theirs. So part of making bedtime easier is managing your own state first. That might sound impossible when you're already exhausted, but it doesn't require some elaborate self-care ritual. Sometimes it's just taking 3 deep breaths before you walk into their room. Sometimes it's reminding yourself that this phase won't last forever. Sometimes it's lowering the stakes in your own mind and deciding that tonight, all that matters is that everyone gets to sleep eventually, even if it's not picture perfect. When you release the pressure you're putting on yourself, your child feels that too. And often, that shift alone changes the entire tone of the evening. I also want to address the guilt that comes up around bedtime. Parents tell me they feel guilty for being impatient, for rushing through the routine, for wishing bedtime was already over. They feel guilty for not cherishing every moment, for not being more present, for sometimes resenting the whole process. That guilt doesn't help anyone. It just adds another layer of stress to something that's already challenging. The truth is, bedtime can be sweet and meaningful, and also exhausting and tedious. Both things can be true at the same time. You can love your child deeply and still find the bedtime routine draining. That doesn't make you a bad parent. It makes you human. What your child needs isn't a parent who feels magical and grateful every single night. They need a parent who shows up consistently, even on the hard nights. They need someone who tries to meet their needs without losing themselves in the process. They need repair when things go sideways, not perfection every time. So if tonight didn't go well, tomorrow is a new chance. If you lost your patience, you can acknowledge it and reconnect. If bedtime felt like a disaster, it doesn't define your entire relationship with your child. You're building something over time, not executing a perfect performance every single evening. And that's actually what makes the difference. Consistency matters more than any individual night. Your child's sense of security doesn't come from one flawless bedtime. It comes from knowing that bedtime happens, that you'll be there, that the general rhythm holds, even when the details vary. They're not keeping score of which nights went smoothly and which ones didn't. They're absorbing the overall pattern. So when you're lying there at night replaying everything that went wrong, remember that your child isn't doing that. They've already moved on. They're asleep. You're the one still holding on to it. Let that go. There's also something important about recognizing when bedtime resistance isn't really about bedtime at all. Sometimes a child fights sleep because they didn't get enough connection during the day. Sometimes it's because they're processing something that happened and don't have the words for it yet. Sometimes it's because they're going through a developmental leap and their brain won't settle. And sometimes, honestly, it's just because they're a kid and going to sleep feels like missing out. You can't always fix the underlying cause in the moment, but you can be curious about it instead of just frustrated. That shift in perspective changes how you respond. Instead of seeing defiance, you might see a need. Instead of feeling like you're failing, you might recognize that your child is struggling with something difficult. That doesn't mean you throw out all boundaries. It just means you hold them with more compassion. Here's what I want you to remember when bedtime feels impossible. You're not supposed to have all the answers. You're not supposed to handle every situation perfectly. Parenting isn't a test you pass or fail. It's a relationship you're building one interaction at a time. Some of those interactions will be warm and connected. Some will be messy and frustrating. All of them matter, but none of them define the whole story. Your child isn't going to remember the night you were too tired to read an extra book. They're going to remember that you were there, that you kept showing up, that even on the hard nights you didn't abandon them. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. Bedtime doesn't have to be perfect to be good enough. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's routine. It doesn't have to be Instagram-worthy or follow every expert recommendation. It just has to work for your family. And working doesn't mean effortless. It means sustainable. It means you're not dreading it every single night. It means your child feels safe, even if they don't always cooperate. It means you're ending the day in a way that lets everyone rest, not in a way that leaves you depleted and resentful. You get to decide what that looks like. You get to adjust as your child grows. You get to change things that aren't working anymore. You get to simplify when life gets overwhelming. You get to ask for help when you need it. And you get to trust that you know your child better than any book or expert or well-meaning friend. They're giving you information every night about what they need. Sometimes that information is clear. Sometimes it's confusing. But you're the one who gets to interpret it and respond. You're the expert on your own kid. So if bedtime has been a struggle, start small. Pick one thing that feels doable and focus on that. Maybe it's just making the room darker. Maybe it's adding 5 minutes of connection before you start the routine. Maybe it's letting go of the idea that your child has to fall asleep independently right now. Maybe it's giving yourself permission to lie down with them without feeling like you're doing it wrong. Small changes compound over time. You don't need a complete overhaul. You just need one shift that makes tonight a little easier than last night. And on the nights when nothing works, when your child is still awake 2 hours later and you're ready to lose your mind, remember that this is temporary. This particular struggle won't last forever. Your child will eventually sleep. They won't be 17 and needing you to lie next to them while they fall asleep. The phase you're in right now, as hard as it is, will pass. What won't pass is the relationship you're building with them through all of this. That's what they're taking with them into the future. Bedtime isn't just about sleep. It's about trust. It's about safety. It's about knowing that even when the day ends, they're not alone. You're giving them that every single night, even on the nights when it feels like everything went wrong, even on the nights when you lost your patience or gave up on the routine halfway through. You still showed up. You're still there. And that's what matters most. Your presence is the foundation everything else is built on. Not the routine, not the strategies, not the perfect execution. Just you, consistently being there, doing your best with what you have. That's enough. It's always been enough. And the sooner you can believe that, the easier all of this becomes. Not because bedtime suddenly gets simple, but because you stop measuring yourself against an impossible standard. You start seeing what's actually working instead of only noticing what isn't. And you give yourself the same grace you'd offer anyone else in your position. That shift doesn't just change bedtime, it changes everything. The gentleness you're searching for at bedtime isn't something you create through perfect technique. It's something that emerges when you stop fighting against your child's needs and your own limitations. When you let go of how it's supposed to look and work with what's actually in front of you. The night becomes gentle not because you followed all the rules, but because you showed up with presence instead of pressure. That's where the real shift happens, in that space between expectation and acceptance, where you finally stop trying to force sleep and simply make room for it to arrive.